Hello everyone, and welcome to the online course on East Caucasian languages organized by the Linguistic Convergence Laboratory of the HEC University, Moscow, Russia. My name is Nikita Muravyov. I'm a research fellow in the lab and the moderator of today's session. Today is the 10th lecture on Valency Alternations and Voice in East Caucasian by Denis Creissels. Before introducing our speaker, just a couple of reminders. Today's lecture will be recorded, live streamed and stored on YouTube. It will go uninterrupted, followed by a question time. All Zoom participants will be muted throughout the session in the interest of the lecture and sound quality. You may send your questions via the Zoom chat or YouTube live chat. At the end of the talk, I will share the screen with a list of selected questions. We apologize in advance that there might be not enough time to address all the questions, but Denis will be able to read them after the talk and hopefully find a way to answer you. It is my pleasure to introduce Denis Creissels, Professor Emeritus at the University of Lyon and member of the research team Dynamique du Langage. Denis has diverse research interests, including linguistic typology, language description, West African linguistics, and Nakh-Daghestanian languages. He has performed extensive fieldwork on a number of underdescribed African languages, such as Balan, Paule, and Mandinka, and also Ahwah, a Nakh-Daghestanian language belonging to Avar Andic branch. Denis is also an expert in possession, modality, transitivity, case marking, to mention but a few, as well as verbal valency and voice, which will be the topic of today's lecture. Denis has published in such high-profile journals as Linguistics, Linguistic Typology, Studies in Language, Linguistic Discovery. He authored 15 monographs, including 2 introductory books on syntax in French and a number of grammars on West African languages, and co-edited 3 books, including a special issue of Linguistic Discovery on Caucasian languages. Denis has an impressive number of 16, at least, articles on Ahwah, covering different aspects of its phonology and grammar. Today, Denis will give us an overview lecture on valency alternations and voice in East Caucasian. Denis, the floor is all yours.
Okay, what should I do now? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we hear you very well. You can share your screen with the presentation.
Should I try to project the slides?
Yes, can you share your slides?
Yes.
Please.
Is it okay? No.
Not yet.
Not yet. No, it doesn't work. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. I don't know why.
Okay.
And I get the message saying that the browser blocks share.
Okay. Yes. So maybe a second.
No, it doesn't work.
Denis, est-ce que vous pourriez faire avec notre browser? Essayez avec notre browser.
Je n'en ai pas d'autre. C'est celui que j'utilise tout le temps.
Alors, ça va être Nikita peut-être qui va faire le screen sharing.
Oh, je t'ai projeté, oui. Ben oui. Ok. So, yes. Can I start now?
Yes, you can start, please.
Is it okay? Everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, so let's start. So this presentation is about the Valency alternation and voice in Nakh-Daghestanian languages. I would like first to remind some basic definitions. Valency refers to the ability of verbs to combine with noun phrases and adpositional phrases representing various elements of the events they denote, participants or circumstances, and to determine the coding characteristics of those among the nominal terms of the clause that refer to semantically essential participants, commonly referred to as arguments. Valency alternation refers to the possibility that two different constructions of the same verb or of two formally related verbs denote identical events or events that differ at most in the assignment of participant roles to individual participants or in the greater or lesser complexity of the causality chain. Example 1 illustrates a valency alternation where the two constructions have the same denotative meaning and differ only in the mapping of participants onto morphosyntactic slots. In 1a, the builder is encoded as the nominative noun phrase or subject, and the thing being built as the accusative noun phrase or direct object, whereas in 1b, the subject represents the thing being built and the builder is encoded as an instrumental oblique. Next, please. Example 2 illustrates a valency alternation where the two constructions denote events that are not identical, but can be analyzed as differing only in the assignment of participant roles to individual participants. In 2a, the roles of washer and person being washed are assigned to two distinct participants encoded as the subject and direct object, respectively, whereas in 2b, a single participant encoded as the subject cumulates both roles. And example 3 illustrates a valency alternation where the two constructions denote events that are not identical, but can be analyzed as differing only in the greater or lesser complexity of the causality chain. In 3a, the breaking process is presented as triggered by an agent encoded as the subject, whereas in 3b, nothing is implied about the causality chain resulting in the breaking process, and the thing undergoing the process is encoded as the subject. Next, please. Coded valency alternations involve a modification of the structure of the verb form. In the previous examples, presence versus absence of the suffix sia. They are often, but not always, morphologically oriented in the sense that one of the two constructions, the derived construction, involves additional morphological material in comparison to the other, the base construction. Valency alternations involving no modification of the structure of the verb form can be designed as uncoded valency alternation. For example, in English, no specific morphological material is involved in the child broke the cup broke, functionally similar to Russian ребенок разбил чашу, чаша разбилась. And the term lability will be used in this presentation as a general term referring to the ability of verbs to lend themselves to uncoded valency alternation of any kind. For uncoded valency alternations involving a change in transitivity, I will use the transparent term Ambi Transitivity. For example, in English, the alternation between the child broke the glass and the glass broke is an instance of Ambi Transitivity. Next, please. The term voice will be used as a general term for morphological operations on verbs, regulating the relationship between the syntactic roles of noun phrases and the way their referents participate in the event denoted by the verb. In other words, voice refers to the verbal coding of valency alternations. It's important to notice that voice markers may be, and in fact often are, polyfunctional. For example, in Russian, the verbal suffix sia may mark not only passivization, as in example 1, reflexivization, as in 2, decausativization, as in 3, but also antipassivization, as in 4, where the same suffix sia blocks the expression of the patientive participant. Next, please. As regards the syntactic roles of the nominal terms of clauses, Nakh-Daghestanian languages have alignment properties that make the use of the traditional notions of subject and direct object somewhat problematic. This is the reason why, in this survey of the valency alternations found in Nakh-Daghestanian languages, the syntactic roles of the nominal terms of clauses will be characterized as follows. Intransitive clauses A and P are the nominal terms whose coding characteristics are identical to those of the agent and the patient of prototypical action verbs in the basic transitive construction, whereas in intransitive clauses, that is, in clauses that do not include a pair of nominal terms meeting the definition of A and P, S is the nominal term whose coding characteristics are identical to those of the sole argument of semantically monovalent verbs, or at least of a subclass of semantically monovalent verbs. Throughout the discussion of valency alternation, it should be borne in mind that in Nakh-Daghestanian languages, the general rule is that the coding characteristics of S coincide with those of P rather than A, the so-called ergative alignment, and this is particularly apparent in case marking, with S and P devoid of overt case marking, contrasting with A in the ergative case. Next, please. And example 5 illustrates ergative alignment in Northern Ahwar, not only in core-term flagging or case marking, but also in core-term indexation. As you can see in this example, in the transitive construction illustrated by the first 3 sentences, A in the ergative case is not indexed on the verb, and P in the nominative case, also known as absolutive, characterized by a 0 ending, controls verb agreement in gender and number, whereas in transitive clauses, the last 3 sentences in this example, S has the same coding characteristics as P in transitive clauses. Next slide, please. As regards morphologically oriented valency alternation, in Nakh-Daghestanian languages, causativization is particularly common. In causativization, the derived construction implies an additional participant in the semantic role of causa, and this additional participant is coded as the A term of a transitive construction. If the base construction is intransitive, which is the case in examples 6 and 7 on this slide, if the base construction is intransitive, the S of the base construction corresponds to P in the derived construction, as in 6, and in languages with ergative alignment in its most typical form, which is the case of Avar, this means that the coding characteristics of the initial S are not modified in the causative construction. In 6, formally, The only difference between the causative construction and the base construction, apart from the presence of a causative marker in the verb form, is simply the addition of a negative marked noun phrase representing the causa. Example 7 shows that the same mechanism operates with bivalent verbs, semantically bivalent verbs, that do not follow the transitive construction, such as in Northern Akhwar Harigurutla, C, whose coding frame is not the ergative nominative coding frame that characterizes transitive verbs, but dative nominative. Note that in 7b, the verbal ending ari with a long a is in fact the contraction of ayari, where ari is the tam ending and I is the causative marker. Next, please. Now, if the base construction is transitive, the treatment of the initial A and P in the causative construction depends on language-specific rules and may vary from language to language. Example 8 illustrates a type of causative construction of transitive verbs, which is particularly widespread in Nakh-Daghestanian languages. In this type of causative construction, as you can see in example 8, the initial P, that is karsh, soap, undergoes no change, whereas the initial A, the girl, is converted into an oblique marked by a local case, here the suppressive. Next, please. In addition to synthetic causatives, in which the verb in the causative construction includes a causative affix, derivational affix, more or less grammaticalized causative periphrases are also very common in Nakh-Daghestanian languages. And semantically, whenever both options are available, the general tendency is that synthetic causatives tend to specifically express direct causation, whereas analytical causatives typically express indirect causation. But in the details, the division of labor between synthetic and analytical causatives vary from one language to another. But the general tendency is always that I've just mentioned. And interestingly, some Nakh-Daghestanian languages in their present state illustrate the transition from analytical causatives to synthetic causatives, and this is in fact, among others, the case of avar, as you can see from in 8. In fact, the causative suffix of avar, isa, in example 9a, quite obviously results from the contraction of an analytical causative construction in which the verb habize, do, make, acts as a causative auxiliary in combination with the infinitive of another verb, and the contraction of ise, the infinitive ending, and ha, the root of the verb make, gives the causative suffix in 9a, isa. Next slide, please. Now, the problem with analytical causatives is that some causative periphrases, and this is the case, for example, in Russian with the causative construction involving zastavить and zastavlять, Such causative periphrases are complex constructions, that is, biclausal constructions, with a verb expressing causation, in Russian zastavить, as the nucleus of the matrix clause, without any clear sign of grammaticalization. Other causative periphrases, such as, for example, the French make causatives, are rather monoclausal constructions whose nucleus is a complex predicate consisting of the lexical verb and another verb acting as a causative auxiliary. However, the evaluation of the degree of grammaticalization of causative periphrases is a very complex question on which there is a huge literature, and this question cannot be addressed in detail in this presentation. If you are interested, you may consult, for example, Daniel and others, 2012 on Agul. Now, example 10 illustrates an analytical causative in which the causative auxiliary is a verb that also exists as a lexical verb with the meaning give, but in Nakh-Daghestanian languages, verbs expressing meanings such as do, make, let, put, drive, send are also quite common in causative periphrases. Okay, next slide, please. Now, depending on language-specific rules, causativization may be subject to conditions on the source construction. For example, Agul can be mentioned as a language with very few restrictions on do causatives. For example, double causatives in which the same marker or auxiliary occurs twice, as in 11, are not allowed. They are allowed in Agul, but they are not allowed in all languages. And as a rule, synthetic causatives are subject to stronger restrictions than analytical causatives. For example, in Northern Ahwar, morphological causativization of transitive verbs is uncommon, with the exception of eat and drink, which behave in this respect like intransitive verbs. Another example, in Lezgi, according to Raspalmat, the overwhelming majority of the verbs that have causative derivates are intransitive, whereas causativization of transitive verbs is productively expressed by means of a construction in which the verb tun, make, takes an infinitival complement clause. Next slide, please. Yes, another example of restrictions on causative constructions. In Navarre, as illustrated in 12, transitive verbs lend themselves to make causativization in either its synthetic or analytical variant. However, in contrast to the situation observed, for example, in Agul, make causatives cannot be further causativized by repeating the causative auxiliary or marker. And as you can see in example 12, make feed, where feed is in Navarre the causative derivative of eat, is expressed not by repeating the causative marker, but by means of a causative periphrasis in which the verb tamiser, put, let, takes an infinitival complement. Next slide, please. Now we turn to antipassivization. In antipassivization, the source construction is transitive, and the derived construction is an intransitive construction in which the initial A is encoded as S, whereas the initial P is either expressed as an oblique or left unexpressed, as in Russian строится. Uncoded active antipassive alternation will be dealt with later in this presentation. For the moment, we are dealing with coded antipassive constructions, and among Nakh-Daghestanian languages, antipassive constructions involving verbal coding are found in Avar, in some Andic languages, for example, Godoberi, and in all Tzizik languages except Khwarji. However, they show some typologically unusual properties. Crucially, in Nakh-Daghestanian languages, the markers that trigger anti-passivization of transitive verbs also combine with intransitive verbs. What is constant in the markers in question is that they express aspectual values such as durative, iterative, or habitual, whereas the fact that they trigger a change in the construction or not depends on the nature of the source construction. Next, please. For example, in Beshta, as you can see on this slide and the following one, with intransitive verbs whose construction includes a single core term in the nominative, such as jump, no change occurs, as in example 38. Now, next slide. In 14, where we have another type of intransitive verbs, the verb cough belongs to a subclass of monovalent verbs that assign ergative case marking to their sole argument, and with such verbs, the antipassive marker triggers a replacement of ergative marking by nominative marking, that is, lack of any overt ending. And finally, with transitive verbs, as in examples 15 and 16, the initial A shows up in the nominative, whereas the initial P is either left unexpressed or expressed as an oblique. That is, in this case, we have canonical antipassivization. Next slide, please. Now, interestingly, the antipassive markers found in Nakh-Daghestanian languages, in addition to the fact that they combine with intransitive verbs without triggering any change in valency, are often also used to mark valency operations other than antipassivizations, at least with some verbs. For example, in Beshta and Hinuk, the suffix whose antipassive use has been illustrated on the previous slides also has a reflexive use, but only with the verb wash. In Beshta, again, the antipassive form of wash shows some particularities. It can have the regular antipassive interpretation, but also the purely reflexive interpretation, wash oneself. And in that case, without any durative or iterative semantics, which otherwise is characteristic of the antipassive marker. And in Hinuk, the antipassive form of wash can only have the reflexive interpretation. I'd like to mention also Creissels. In Creissels, according to Autier, anti-passivization involving verbal coding is found only with the verbs eat and drink, which, as you can see, often have particularities as regards valency alternations. And in Creissels, the suffix marking anti-passivization of eat and drink is the transitivizing suffix productively used in passive function. Now we turn to passivization. In passivization, a valency operation quite common cross-linguistically, but not so common among Nakh-Daghestanian languages. The participant encoded as the A of a transitive construction is backgrounding, but still present in conceptual structure. Depending on language-specific rules, it may be expressed as an oblique or left unexpressed. Passivization is not common at all among Nakh-Daghestanian languages. It is found in Creissels. This Creissels has a verbal derivation described by Autier as medio-passive, but in fact, all the examples he provides are clearly passive. This derivation, I think, should rather be identified as passive, since in all the examples available, the participant encoded as A in the source construction cannot be expressed, but is still present semantically. That is, it's not medio-passive. They are not medio-passive constructions, but rather agentless passives. And according to Schulz in UDI, the motion verb to go, I quote, has developed into a full-fledged passive marker, at least in the dialect of Vartashen. And those are, to the best of my knowledge, the only instances of passivizations that have been reported in Nakh-Daghestanian languages. Next slide, please. Next, okay. Now we turn to decausativization, as known as anti-causativization. In this valency operation, the participant encoded as the A of the transitive construction is not just backgrounded as in passivization, but eliminated from the conceptual structure, and the remaining argument is presented as undergoing a process without any clear indication about the causality chain implied in this process. Like passivization, decausativization is not common in Nakh-Daghestanian languages. The only example I came across is in Lezgi. According to Raspelmat, Lezgi has a decausative construction involving analytical verb forms consisting of the stem of the base verb, the transitive verb, combined with the verb hun, become, or be, as, for example, Aqalun, clause transitive, Aqalhun, clause intransitive. Not, however, that as observed by Haspelmat in Lezgi, with some verbs, this is not really decausativization, since the process denoted by this form is not inactive and implies some activity, may imply some activity of the participant, as with hide, Chunihun, hide transitive, Chunihun, hide intransitive, or Evelyn Mishun marry, Evelyn Mishun get married. In such cases, if we refer to Geniushine's typology of detransitivization rather than decausative. The construction must rather be characterized as autocausative. Next, please. Yes. Now we turn to the equivalent coding of valency alternations, that is intransitive transitive verb pairs in which the two members of the pair share the same stem but do not differ in morphological complexity. That is, it's not possible to describe one of the members of the pair as deriving from the other by some morphological operation. Some such verb pairs are not rare in Nakh-Daghestanian languages, but they are mainly found with compound verbs, that is, with verbs consisting of a non-verbal word, very often a borrowed word, and a light verb. And semantically, they can be characterized as non-causal causal pairs, that is, the meanings expressed are the same as those otherwise expressed by causative or decausative derivation. For example, in Lezgi, who improve intransitive consists of the adjective qsan, good, and the light verb become, whereas the corresponding transitive verb is formed by adding the causative suffix to the same stem. That is, both members of the pair involve addition of some morphologically material to their common root. And Forker describes a similar situation in Hinur for compound verbs formed on other borrowings. They typically come in pairs, such as hadurir, be prepared, haduru, prepare, where the stem, the root, the root is the other adverb hadur, ready, and this root combines with the light verbs irq, become, happen to give the intransitive member the non-causal meaning of the member of the pair, whereas in combination with the light verb u, do, make, we get the transitive or causal member of the pair. Next, please. Now we turn to Ambi Transitivity. In fact, in this presentation, I will not deal with uncoded valency alternations in general. The discussion, for reasons of time limitations, the discussion will be limited to the two main varieties of Ambi Transitivity, that is Ambi Transitivity and Pme Transitivity. In Ambi Transitivity, the A term in the construction of a verb used transitively corresponds to the S term in the construction of the same verb used intransitively. Whereas in the intransitive construction, the P of the transitive construction may be coded as an oblique or left unexpressed. And interestingly, given the predominance of ergative alignment in Nakh-Daghestanian languages, Ambi Transitivity implies a change in the coding of the A argument, as you can see in 17, in the transitive construction of the Godoberi verb for suck. The agent, the child, is in the ergative case, whereas in the intransitive construction, in which the patient cannot be expressed, the remaining argument, the agent, is now the S term of an intransitive clause and consequently in the nominative or absolutive case. And consequently, Ambi Transitivity is more visible and less problematic in languages with ergative alignment than in languages with accusative alignment. Now, in most Nakh-Daghestanian languages, there are some Ambi transitive verbs, but as a rule, Ambi transitivity is a lexical property of very limited sets of verbs, with an exception. The situation in this respect is very different in Dargi languages. Next, please. Salient particularity of Dargi languages as regards verb valency is that they have a relatively productive, active anti-passive alternation involving no specific coding on the verb, whose analysis is made difficult by the polyfunctionality of the ergative, the case labeled ergative in Dargi. In Dargi, the ergative case is not only the case for agents in the basic transitive construction, it is also used for some types of obliques, for example, instrumental obliques, which is quite common. But the problem is that the instrumental case is also the case used in the intransitive construction of Ambi transitive verbs to flag the oblique term corresponding to the P of the transitive construction. And as you can see from example 18, this may give at first sight the false impression that the core terms of the transitive construction exchange their roles, since in 18a the agent is in the ergative, in B it's in the nominative, whereas house is in the nominative in 18a, but in the ergative morphologically in B. However, this is not really the case. This alternation cannot be described as involving an exchange of roles between the two arguments, and the observation of agreement is decisive for a correct analysis of this alternation in Dargi. Crucially, as illustrated by example 18a, in the basic transitive construction, both A and P act as agreement controllers. In the glosses, M, masculine, indicates agreement with the agent Murad, and you have this agreement on the verb make, the last word of the sentence, whereas NPL, non-human plural, indicates agreement with the patient Huldre houses. By contrast, ergative marked obliques, in contrast to ergative marked agents, do not intervene in agreement mechanisms. And in intransitive predication, all agreement mechanisms are controlled by the sole core term. Consequently, the fact that in 18b all the agreement marks are masculine, there's no non-human plural agreement in 18b, the fact that all the agreement marks in 18b are masculine shows that the patient has been demoted to ergative marked oblique, since it does not control any agreement mechanism anymore, whereas the zero marked noun phrase representing the agent in 18b is the S term of an intransitive predication. Next, please. Now we turn to Pme Transitivity. In Pme Transitivity, the P of the transitive construction corresponds to the S of the intransitive construction of the same verb, whereas the participant coded as the A of the transitive construction may be coded as an oblique or left unexpressed. Two semantic varieties of Pme Transitivity must be distinguished. In the encoded causal-non-causal alternation, as in decausativization, the intransitive construction expresses the elimination of the agent from the conceptual structure, as in English, I broke the glass broke, whereas in the encoded active-passive alternation, as in passivization, the intransitive construction expresses backgrounding of the agent, which means that even if the agent is left unexpressed, it remains present in the conceptual structure. As in English, I am washing the cloth washes easily. In the languages that have ergative alignment, as illustrated by example 19, Pme transitivity implies no change in the coding of the P argument. Consequently, this raises a problem, namely that in Nakh-Daghestanian languages, true Pme transitivity can easily be confused with the possibility of expressing reference to non-specific agents by simply dropping the A term of the transitive construction. Next slide, please. For example, one might wonder whether the sentences in example 20 are best analyzed as instances of uncoded active-passive alternation or as A-less transitive clauses. However, in the absence of any compelling evidence supporting the passive analysis, the unspecified A omission analysis must be preferred for sentence 20, since, as illustrated by example 21, unspecified argument omission is not limited to transitive clauses. It's also found, for example, for dative mode experiencers in the construction of verbs such as see. Next slide, please. Tests to distinguish the encoded causal-non-causal alternation from A omission in transitive clauses have been discussed by a number of authors. And an interesting observation made by Daniel and others 2012 is that, however problematic it may be for linguists, the distinction is absolutely obvious for native speakers. In any case, once the tests distinguishing the encoded causal-non-causal alternation from A omission in transitive clauses are applied, it turns out that across Nakh-Daghestanian languages, there is important variation in the relative productivity of Pme transitivity and the other strategies available for the coding of the causal-non-causal alternation. Pme transitivity is very productive in other, but most Nakh-Daghestanian languages have limited sets of Pme transitive verbs, very often very limited sets of Pme transitive verbs. Haspelmath 1993 proposed a questionnaire of 31 verb pairs to investigate the cross-linguistic variation in the choice between the possible strategies for encoding intransitive transitive verb pairs that can be characterized semantically as causal versus non-causal. Causativization is a the strategy where the causal verb may morphologically derive from its non-causal counterpart. Decausativization, the non-causal verb may morphologically derive from its causal counterpart. Equipolant derivation, both verbs, the two verbs are formally related but do not differ in morphological complexity. Ambi Transitivity, the non-causal verb and its causal counterpart are identical. And finally, suppletivism, the non-causal verb and its causal counterpart are not related formally. The table on this slide compares the results obtained on the basis of this questionnaire in 4 Nakh-Daghestanian languages, Northern Afar, Avar, Lezgi, and Tsez. The main observation is that within the limits of the questionnaire, Avar has an extremely high number of causative pairs, 26 out of 31. That is much more, many more than any of the languages included in Haspelmath's language sample. Whereas the proportion of ambitransitive verbs is considerably higher in Avar than in the other 3 languages. And this is a clear typological contrast between languages that in most respects show a high degree of typological homogeneity. Next, please. Now we turn to the involuntary agent construction. Involuntary agent constructions are intransitive constructions of typical transitive verbs meeting the following conditions, as in the causal non-causal alternation. The S of the involuntary agent construction corresponds semantically to the P of the transitive construction. And the involuntary agent construction includes an oblique phrase, typically marked by a spatial case or adposition, representing an animate participant involved in the causality chain without really being an agent. Example 22 illustrates this type of construction in the Australian language Gugu Yimidir. In this example, the intransitive nature of the involuntary agent construction is marked by decausative derivation. Next, please. Involuntary agent constructions are common in Nakh-Daghestanian languages with 3 possible variants illustrated in examples 23 to 25. In 23, the verb in the involuntary agent construction is the underived intransitive verb biqurutla, break intransitive, whereas the verb in the corresponding transitive construction is its causative derivate biqurutla, break transitive. And the involuntary agent in the involuntary agent construction is in the ablative case. Next, please. In 24, we have another variant of the involuntary agent construction in which the involuntary agent construction involves a decausative periphrasis consisting of the masdar of the lexical verb and the auxiliary become. Literally, from me, throwing away this bottle happened, for I accidentally threw away this bottle. And finally, 25 illustrates the 3rd possible variant of the involuntary agent construction, in which the verb is P ambitransitive and consequently can feature in the transitive construction and in the involuntary agent construction without any change in its form. Note that since the verb doesn't change, the analysis of 25 and similar constructions as involving a change in transitivity is not obvious, since no voice marker is present. And an alternative analysis, which was put forward by Milchuk, is that, in fact, according to Milchuk, 25A and 25B are both transitive clauses that differ only in the flagging of the A term. However, I think that this analysis has been abandoned by now. In any case, as argued by Haspelmath, there is compelling evidence that 25B is not a transitive clause with an alternative flagging of the agent and rather involves Ambi Transitivity of the non-causal causal type. Next, please. Now we turn to the Bi-Nominative Construction, which will be the last topic addressed in this presentation. All Nakh-Daghestanian languages have a transitive construction with A in the ergative case, but in many of them, transitive verbs also have a so-called bi-nominative or bi-absolutive construction in which both co-arguments of transitive verbs are devoid of overt case marking. Semantically, this construction implies imperfective aspect, and its typical function is to express agent topicalization. In the Bi-nominative construction of Northern Ahwah, illustrated in 26, both co-arguments of transitive verbs are devoid of overt case marking and both are indexed. However, this only occurs with the progressive form of the verb, that is, with analytical verb forms consisting of bi'urutla bi in auxiliary function and the progressive converb of the lexical verb. In this construction, as you can see in 26, in 26b, the agent is indexed on the auxiliary, whereas the patient is indexed on the lexical verb. Okay. Now, this in this example, sentence A can be analyzed and involving an analytical verb form that has exactly the same case assignment properties as a syntactic form of a transitive verb. By contrast, analyzing machene yiqwari in sentence B as an analytical verb form in a monoclausal construction will not account for the fact that its two elements do not agree with the same argument. This phenomenon has, however, a very simple explanation if the bi-nominative construction is analyzed as a biclausal construction involving the phenomenon known as raising, which means that in the bi-nominative construction, the main verb is the intransitive verb be. The transitive verb is the nucleus of an embedded clause. And instead of being expressed within the embedded clause, the participant normally expressed as the A of the transitive verb is expressed as the S of B. In the case of Northern Ahwah, I am aware of nothing in the properties of the bi-nominative construction that could be viewed as compelling evidence against the biclausal analysis. Next, please. However, the syntactic properties of the bi-nominative construction are not uniform across the Nakh-Daghestanian family, and Forker 2012 examines various types of properties of the bi-nominative constructions that may be viewed in some languages as evidence of monoclausality, and she discusses possible alternatives to the biclausal analysis. Functionally, the bi-nominative construction has affinities with antipassive constructions, in particular from the aspectual point of view. However, syntactic demotion of the patient is an essential element of antipassive constructions as commonly defined, whereas in the bi-nominative construction, the coding properties of the patient are not affected. And in fact, in the bi-nominative construction, both arguments of transitive verbs show coding characteristics, lack of overt flagging and indexation, typical for core arguments. In fact, within the frame of a monoclausal analysis of the bi-nominative construction, the alternation can only be accounted for in terms of split transitive coding conditioned by TAM, and by no means as a valency alternation. In a paper published in 2014, Gagliardi and others compare the bi-nominative constructions of Tses and Lac and conclude that the Tses bi-nominative construction, like that of Arroir, is a biclausal construction, whereas the bi-nominative construction in Lac is a monoclausal construction. Well, now, very briefly, the main conclusions of this presentation. First, causativization is by far the commonest type of coded valency alternation and in comparison with other language families, causativization in Nakh-Daghestanian languages shows no typologically unusual property. Now, coded antipassive constructions are relatively widespread in Nakh-Daghestanian languages, but the markers that trigger anti-passivization of transitive verbs are basically spectral markers that trigger a change in the construction of transitive verbs, but also combine with intransitive verbs without triggering any valency change. Then decausativization and passivization are found in very few languages within the Nakh-Daghestanian language family. Then valency alternations with equipolant coding are typically found with compound verbs. Next, Dargi languages are the only ones in which Ambi Transitivity is relatively productive. In general, Pme Transitivity of the causal non-causal type is limited to relatively small sets of verbs, but avar is a clear exception to this rule. Involuntary agent constructions are widespread. They can be characterized as intransitive constructions in which a human participant involved in the causality chain without being a real agent is encoded as an oblique marked by a spatial case. And finally, bi-nominative constructions show important variation in their properties and cannot be analyzed in a uniform way across Nakh-Daghestanian languages, but in any case, there are not instances of valency alternation. Okay, that's all. Thank you for your attention. Спасибо за внимание.
Okay. Thank you so much for such an interesting presentation. Now, in a few seconds, you will see a list of questions.
Okay.
Yes, please. So please, can you share the screen with the questions, please?
I cannot see anything.
Yes. Oh, 1 second. Okay, here they are.
Okay.
Would you like me to read them out, or you will just read them yourself?
I can read them. The first one is
Okay,
any
thanks.
examples of double causativization with syntactic morphological markers in Agul or any other Nakh-Daghestanian languages. Well, in Agul, I think that Mish could answer this question better than me. In other Nakh-Daghestanian languages, no example comes to my mind, but I don't exclude that maybe in some languages. I don't know. Double causativization with synthetic morphological markers occurs in Turkic languages. That's well-known fact. In Nakh-Daghestanian languages, I don't know, but I cannot exclude the possibility. Now, the next question. Yes, it's not a question, it's just, okay, thank you. Do we know that not a transitive with as regards the coughing example, well, I took it from a paper by Comrie, Forker, and Khalilova. They mention this verb as an intransitive anergative, but my knowledge of Beshta doesn't allow me to be more precise on this point. You should ask perhaps Zaira Khalilova, she could answer this question. So Evelyn Michon is transitive in Lezgi. Well, at least it's mentioned. I don't know. I should. Here again, this is an example taken from Haspelmath's grammar of Lezgi, and I should, to answer this question, I should consult the source. As regards the alternation in Tanti-Dagi, is this a focus strategy? Well, here again, I'm not, my knowledge of Dagi is very limited. Several articles have been published about this this construction. Here again, before answering, I should consult the source from which I took this example. I concentrated on the syntactic analysis, since the appearance of this alternation is somewhat confusing, since two noun phrases seem to exchange their roles, but consideration of agreement shows that this is not the case, and I concentrated on this aspect of the question. As regards the function of this alternation, before answering, I should consult the source. Yes, in relation to the information structure is probable. Okay, thank you. I might be missing something, but since well, Ambi Transitivity and accusative alignment are completely different things. Accusative alignment is a property of languages. Ambi Transitivity is a property of individual verbs. Now, what occurs in that in languages that have accusative alignment, like English or French, Ambi Transitivity is, so to say, trivial, since you just take the transitive construction, you drop the object, and you get an intransitive construction, as in English, John drank the water John drank. But as notions, Ambi Transitivity is an individual property of verbs, which may concern a greater or lesser proportion of the verbal lexicon of languages. For example, in most Bantu languages, any transitive verb is in fact Ambi Transitive, whereas in some other languages, Ambi Transitivity may be very limited or inexistent. Now, next question. Yes, Ambi Transitivity, lability, it's a question of terminology. In my use of these terms, lability is a cover term. This was the definition of lability put forward by Polinskaya, whereas Ambi Transitivity refers to lability involving a change in transitivity. Now, the next question concerning intransitive experience, are they compatible with the causative? Yes. Yes, this is the case in the Ahwar example with C. C is an intransitive experiential verb, and show in Ahwar is expressed just by putting a harigurutla in the causative form. The answer is yes. And can this causativized verb be decausativized? Well, it depends. No, since, depends on the languages. If the language has morphological decausativization, why not? But, for example, in Ahwar, which is a strongly causativizing language, which has no detransitivizing devices at all. This is not possible, but this depends on the properties of individual languages. Now, Mish, I have missed something, but why do we connect in voluntary agent and transitivity? Well, simply because agent evokes transitive constructions. And, no, my conclusion is not that the involuntary agent construction is based on intransitive verb. This is an alternation. And depending on the languages, there are three possibilities. The alternation may involve an ambitransitive verb, a transitive verb and its decausative derivate, or an intransitive verb, as in, for example, in Ahwar. The same alternation functionally may involve an intransitive verb and its causative derivate. It's an alternation defined in, let's say, functional terms with three variants depending on the individual languages, and the three variants differ in the transitivity properties of the verb involved in the alternation. Jeremy, are there intransitive verb constructions in Ahwar? Yes, but very few. Perhaps 2 or 3 verbs, not more. Can it ever alternate with nominative? Well, if you're interested, I can have a look at my documentation. But in any case, there are no time restrictions. There are very few intransitive verbs that compatible with their sole argument in the nominative case, and they are so rare that there's no point in trying to make generalizations. What I am pretty sure is that time is not relevant. in the choice between the two possibilities. Involuntary agent is expressed through a transitive verb in intransitive usage. Well, in some languages, but as I just mentioned, the same, functionally the same alternation may involve an intransitive verb in the involuntary agent construction and the causative derivate in the transitive construction, or the other way around, or an Ambi Transitive verb. Is that okay? Are there
are comments.
Comments? Very interesting. Cartesian and semantic. Well, yes, I know, but well, as far as I am aware of, this analysis is, there is some controversy about this analysis, okay. But in any case, why not? Excuse me, there was, oh. It seems that I accidentally omitted the final verb in example 12. Excuse me, I don't have this example on my screen. Can you remind me example 12? Which is it? Excuse me, I cannot check example 12. But in any case,
would you like me to show? Okay, or you can maybe look at this later.
Yes. Okay. Carry. Yes. Okay. Okay. For the other question, Timo answers much better. Two causative suffixes, one after the other. Yes, it's possible. It's possible to stack auxiliaries, but not suffixes. Is that what? Okay. And okay, thank you for the remarks. Yes. Well, I think I have nothing to add to these remarks. Well, unusually playability in Andi. This is strange for an Andic language. Well, but Ava is not far from this area. Well, okay.
Okay, so seems to be all the questions and comments. Okay, so thank you.
Yes, but well, if participants, excuse me, if participants want to send me their questions by email, I'll try to answer. For the moment, I don't have possibilities to check from the sources, but if participants have questions and want to email me, well, then they feel free to ask the question.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for your participation and for the questions. So, and yes, thank you, Denis, for the answers. And I hope to see.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and I hope to see you all back next Wednesday for the lecture by Oleg Bilev on clause combining in East Caucasian languages. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.